submission of documents. So if you have something missing or if something isn't arrived yet, you'll be able to see that very clearly on your checklist. And really, I think that last tip is important. Silence isn't negativity, right? So we take a while to move through the application. So you might not hear a lot from us for a little bit, and that's okay. We do try to send updates when we need them, but it does take a while to read the application. So make sure you're checking your portal, make sure you're checking your email. You will hear from us when we have something to communicate. And then, of course, we would invite you to connect with us. We, as an admission staff, divide the country and the world into areas. Some of us have states, some of us have regions of states, some of us have countries, some of us have regions of continents. Go online and check out where the admissions officer from where your school is happens to be assigned to, and then if you have questions, you can email that individual officer. For example, Ryan here on the call does China, so for our applicants from China, he's in correspondence with them. Chris happens to do our applicants from Massachusetts, so all of our great kids from Boston, they are going to email Chris. I happen to do students who are from Japan. So all the students from Japan will email me. So we really want to make sure we're personalized in our responses. So don't be a stranger. Do reach out to us and let us know what's on your mind, and we'll try to get your questions answered. Now we're going to move on to financial aid, and I'll turn it to Allison to tell us more.
Great. Thanks so much, Adam. So financial aid is at Pomona is need-based, which means that all of the financial aid decisions that are made at Pomona are based on the financial information submitted by you and your family. So even though your admission application has gone in, the financial aid staff does not have access to how wonderful your application is. So no matter how accomplished your admission application is, the entire financial aid review is based on the information that's provided in the financial aid application. So, and when we make that offer of financial aid, we need 100% of your demonstrated need, which means that we figure out how much, based on the information that you've provided, we feel you would need in order to be able to attend Pomona, and then we provide the grant aid to supplement enough of your cost in order to make it possible for you to attend. So our entire goal is to make it manageable financially for every student who is admitted by Adam and his wonderful staff to attend. So our goal is that if you are admitted, that you're able to come, and financial aid works very hard to make sure that that happens. The financial aid packages for our international students, if we have some who have joined us this afternoon, are comprised of institutional funding. So most of the funding for international students comes directly from Pomona and not from other sources. We do not use educational loans in our initial financial aid packages, which means that you'll have a small work component, and then the majority of the financial aid that is provided is grant aid from Pomona. So hopefully that will be to everyone's great advantage. Now, in order to figure out in advance of the financial aid award notification, which, by the way, you should receive at the same time that you receive an admission notification. So in the portal, you have your admission application. Everybody's going to get really good at looking at the portal to see whether all of your application materials have been received, and you're checking for references, and you're checking, well, there's also another tab for financial aid. Don't forget to look at that, right? Because what happens with that financial aid tab is that's where we list the things that we need. And even before admissions has made any admission decisions, we're updating that tab all the time for things that we feel like we might need. In case you're admitted, we're going to need those materials. So there are points over the course of the process where we may be asking for for additional materials beyond the initial application materials. But if you wanted to kind of give yourself a preview of what you might expect, you could use a couple of the tools that are on our website. If you look on the website, it says admissions and financial aid, you click there, you'll see the financial aid page, and you can go to My Intuition or to the net price calculator to try to enter your financial information so that you can get kind of a best estimate of what your financial aid would include. And then as we go through the process, we look at everybody's information. Sometimes we request additional information even before we know whether you've been admitted or not, because if we're going to provide a financial aid award at the same time your admission notice goes out, we need to request sometimes more information for all students. So, so just a reminder to sort of keep looking at that financial aid. And then once you get your financial aid award, there is there's an appeal process that you can go through if it doesn't feel as though what we're asking the family to contribute is something that would be manageable. So applying coming up, January 15th, the application deadline for financial aid. If you miss the deadline, we're not going to penalize you in any way. What happens is that if you get all of your financial aid materials and they come in January 16th or 17th, that's really not a big deal. But it's important to try to meet the deadline if at all possible, because we want to make sure that if you are admitted, that we're in a position of providing a financial aid offer to you at the same time. So if you get your materials in significantly later than January 15th, there's a good chance that if you are admitted, we might not be able to provide that financial aid award notice at the same time. But you won't receive, if we do receive the materials a little bit later, it doesn't mean that we won't come up with an offer. We will come up with a financial aid offer as soon as we have all of the materials. And it will be, you won't have lost any money, but you just might have a little bit less time to consider whether you can afford coming to Pomona and speaking with your financial aid officer, which is, and we want to encourage you to have a conversation with your financial aid officer in order to be able to make sure that if you're admitted to Pomona, you're committed to coming to Pomona, you really want to come to Pomona, that the finances aren't what's standing in your way. So the application process seems kind of daunting, but it's not. So there's just two things you got to hand in, right? You got to hand in a profile form, and you have to hand in a FAFSA form. The profile form and the FAFSA form are both available October 1st. So you can do them now. If you haven't done them, I would suggest that's the best place to start, right? The profile form asks for the financial information for the household and we use that form in order to decide how to best use Pomona's resources to meet the need that you have, right? The FAFSA form is the form that we use to determine how much federal aid you would be eligible for. So the two forms ask a lot of the same questions, but we're using them to determine the eligibility for different sources of funding. So that's why you have to do kind of two forms that kind of look a little bit the same or ask some repetitive questions. But the profile form, you can fill out online. And if you haven't gone there yet, it's right on our website. You can click right through to it and get right to it. And you fill out your household income information. It determines your eligibility for Pomona funding. And if you're international, you can enter the information in your home country's currency, and it will convert it for us so that we don't have to do that later. And then at the end of the profile form, there is a fee. And if you are charged that fee and you're not able to pay that fee, especially if you're an international student, you just need to shoot an email to our office and we can provide you with a fee waiver, which you can use to submit the form to Pomona. The fee waiver only works for one school. So if we give you a fee waiver, that will allow you to submit the profile form to Pomona for review. And then that's the other form. The FAFSA form is the other one, which was also open and you were, it opened up on October 1st. The only thing that I would add here is that if at all possible, please retrieve the information from the IRS. It sounds kind of intimidating, but it actually will make the process a lot easier because sometimes the federal government asks for additional documentation, and if you've retrieved the information from the IRS, while you're going through the FAFSA form, it will ask you, do you want us to retrieve the information? And if you say yes, it'll ask you a few more questions, and it should just roll you right through the process. If you're able to do that, I highly recommend that, because then that will reduce the amount of additional information that we may have to ask for later, right? And as I mentioned, the FAFSA form will tell us what you're eligible for in terms of any kind of federal funding. If you are not a citizen or a permanent resident, we need you to, but you are a California resident, we need you to fill out the California DREAM Act application. And you can see there's also a link to that from our website, and that would determine your eligibility for the California grant. And that, I think, we sort of goes through the basics. The only thing that I would want to sort of point out is just to remember to keep looking at the information that we're requesting from financial aid, because as we do initial reviews for all of the applicants, we will add documents that we feel that we might need in order to be able to complete your file. So you'll hand in the FAFSA, you'll hand in the profile, you might see a few more documents that you need to hand in, and if you have any questions about those, then shoot us an email, give us a phone call, let us know what your questions are, and we'll be sure to try and answer them for you. So I'm hoping that wasn't too fast, but I also want to make sure that everybody understands that it looks more complicated than it is. Once you get into it, it's the financial aid piece of it is very manageable. Just get those 2 forms done, and then move on. It won't absorb your life, I promise. So I want to make sure that we have some good time for questions, and
okay. Well, I can start with a few. There's a few kind of short ones here, Allison, that we can move through rapidly. Can you just talk about paying for the CSS profile? So for students who are applying for financial aid, you still need to pay for the CSS profile, correct? Because that is not a Pomona form. You access that on a different form, and then they send it to Pomona, right?
Exactly. So the profile form is the form that is a College Board form. So it'll be a College Board website, and you fill out the profile form, and there is and there's a fee for completing the form. If you have had a fee waiver for the SAT or for any of your, then you would automatically have a fee waiver for the profile form. If you had a fee waiver for the SAT, you would also have an automatic waiver for the profile. So, but if they also take a look to see if they would consider your family a lower income family, and then in that situation, the fee would also be waived. If none of those things happen and you're still charged a fee at the end, you would either need to pay that fee, or you would need to stop, save your form, and email us and asking us for a fee waiver code, which we can then provide for you.
Right. So just because there was some international students, I think we're a little confused on this. The Common App is just to apply to Pomona. That's what we're going to read in the application office. What Allison is talking about with the CSS profile, they're only going to read that in the financial aid office. So you can't go to one website and complete both applications. They're 2 separate processes that you complete sort of in parallel. You kind of do them alongside each other, so that, as Allison was talking about earlier, we can get you an offer of admission and a financial aid package at the same time. That's always the goal.
Right. I think you can connect to the FAFSA form from the Common App if you're, which international students obviously do not need to complete. So there's no need for an international student to connect to that. But the 2 are not connected. So even though you can move from the Common App to a FAFSA form, the 2 applications are completely separate in that situation. And then the profile form is in addition to the Common App and the FAFSA form. So in total, there would be 3 forms if you were a citizen or permanent resident. And if you're not, there would be 2 forms, the Common App and then the profile form.
Right. And so if you're looking for a fee for the CSS profile, you should email the financial aid office and explain your situation, and they'll be able to help you. If you're looking for a fee waiver for the common application, you should email the admissions office. So I just want to make sure that there's not confusion on that, because we use some of the same language sometimes around fee waivers, but they're for two different products. They're for two different purposes. All right. So I'll take this next question here, which is, what are you looking for in a Pomona student? And, you know, one of the things that I think is so important, and I did it, this is kind of a long one, I'm going to put it in Audrey's answer. You know, the reality is Pomona is broad enough to be able to accommodate many kinds of students, many kinds of thinkers. And so the kinds of things we're looking for are often the same kinds of things that many great small liberal arts or liberal arts institutions generally are looking for, right? We want students who are creative, students who are interested in thinking across boundaries, across disciplines, students who are interested in life beyond the classroom. We want students who are leaders, perhaps in certain spaces, but interested in maybe leading in new spaces in college. The kinds of students that we want don't have a sort of label. There isn't a type of Pomona student when it comes to specifics, but there are what we will call habits of mind, the kinds of ways in which you engage learning. And so if you are a student in class that's constantly asking questions, if you are a student in class that likes to bring people together to learn in a collaborative way, if you are a student who gets really excited about going down a rabbit hole to learn about certain topics that you're really interested in, that is who we're looking for. We talk a lot about academic excellence and community citizenship. And so the kinds of things that we need at Pomona are really students who are doing both. We need students who are going to be committed to the classroom experience. That is the reason you go to Pomona, to get a fantastic education. And students who are committed to the community experience. And so that citizenship, who you are in your community, the kinds of communities you enjoy being part of. There's lots of ways to form community in college. Those are also things we're interested in. So we've designed an application to answer both kinds of questions, or to help you tell us both kinds of answers, you might say. And that's really what we are interested in. The difference is that because of our admissions process being need blind, we are not looking for certain kinds of students to give a music scholarship to or an athletic scholarship to. Financial aid is based purely on need. And so there are certain parameters that you have to meet, as Allison talked about, in order to demonstrate need, but they are not related to whether or not we are going to admit you. We are need blind, and that's really what that term means when we talk about being need blind. For our international students, and there's a couple of questions here about this, we are need aware, which means we do look at family finances and the ability to pay, the ability to fund an education when it comes to making some of our final decisions for non-U.S. citizens who are being educated outside of the United States. So if you are undocumented or documented or being educated in the United States, we are need blind for you, meaning we don't look at finances. If you're an international student, a non-U.S. citizen living and going to school outside of the United States, we are need aware for you. So we are going to look at that potential amount of funding that we have to provide you. I don't want you to think about it that way, though, because there's two things I want to point to. One, Pomona, relative to many of our peers, gives out a lot of international financial aid. So almost half, about 46% of our international students are on financial aid. That's actually a significant number compared to other top liberal arts schools, even compared to the Ivies. That percentage is high. And our average financial aid package is also relatively high. And so we're looking at pretty high average financial aid packages. We're looking at the full need policies that we have in place for domestic students. We also have that in place for international students, and the no initially packaged loan policies that we have for domestic students. We also have those for international students. So the package you get as an international student should be extraordinarily competitive and allow you to afford to come to Pomona. So those are the things I really want you to focus on rather than the need aware or the need blind piece if you're an international student. Yes, it matters, but it doesn't matter nearly as much as you might think. And the support that you get at Pomona is substantial, even in the world of other highly selectives. Okay, so that should actually take care of many of the questions here around admissions. The other questions around financial aid that I want to get to, can you explain how to submit financial aid to Pomona and make sure it goes through? So we have some questions here about how do I know that my documents are actually into the office, Allison?
Okay. So there's a couple of questions about COVID-related finances that I'm going to get to because I think that's really important too. So as I mentioned in the presentation, one of the most important things for admissions as well as for financial aid is for you to check the portal and make sure your documents have been received, right? So when we get an initial application and you indicate whether you want to be considered for financial aid or not, then we list the documents that we feel that we need on your portal. So before you've handed anything in, you should have a list of documents on your financial aid page with the financial aid tab on your portal, which is in the same place where you go to look for your admission documents. Just one tab over. And you take a look at that, and there should be a list. And the list will either have green checks if you've handed in the documents, or it'll have big red X's, right? So it's pretty obvious what we have and what we don't have. And if you still need to hand documents in, the easiest place to figure out how to hand those in is to go to our website, because we have direct links to all of those. You may be able to link, there may be direct links from the portal for some of the forms that need to be handed in. But for example, if you go to our how to apply for financial aid on our website, you can click on the FAFSA link. It'll take you to the FAFSA. You fill out the FAFSA, and then we get an electronic copy of the FAFSA after you've submitted it. And then as soon as we get that electronic copy, we check that box off. And then when you come back a couple of days later after you filled out the FAFSA, you can see that we've received the electronic copy. Same thing happens with the profile form. You can go to our website, you can click on the profile link under how to apply for financial aid. You click on that profile link, you go to the profile, you fill out all the information that you need to, you hit the submit button, and then that electronic copy of all of the data that you just submitted comes over to our office, and then overnight, the little checkbox gets checked off that says we've received your financial information. If we're requiring tax returns or either foreign tax returns or U.S. tax returns, then we will ask for those at that same time. We may add them later, so be sure to sort of check back periodically. But we have listed all of the documents that you should need to hand in on the portal, so there shouldn't be any surprises. Then to hand in the tax returns or any additional documentations, we use an imaging service which is called IDOC or IDOC. And once you fill out the profile form, you will get a notice that says, hey, this is how you'll get an email to that email address. So you want to make sure, like Adam said, you got to use an email address that you take a look at, right? Because if you're going to get these communications, be looking in that email fairly frequently, right? And you'll get an email from the College Board that says, hey, Pomona needs these documents from you. Can you submit them? And then you can click on that email to the link and upload the documents that we're asking for, and then College Board will tell you exactly the documents that we need. So if we need, a tax return or a foreign return or a W-2 or a verification form because the federal government asked for something, it will list all of those things, and then you can submit them and upload them at that point. After you've done all that, you check back, it's all green check marks and you're all done. You should be in good shape. You can check back in a week or two and make sure that we haven't added something when we reviewed your file. Oftentimes we'll add a little something that we might need for a little bit of clarification. If we do, we'll make it clear how you can upload that document so that we get a secure copy of it. You just have to sort of just stay on it. Just like your admission application, you want to make sure that every piece has been received. And if you're unsure about how to submit that piece, give our office a call or shoot us an email, and we'll make sure that you know exactly how to get it into us without too much difficulty. Can I talk a little bit about sort of COVID?
Yeah.
Okay. So for so on the FAFSA form and on the profile form, students use and families use information that is almost 2 years old, right? So we're using 2019 tax returns for students who are going to be entering in fall of 2021, right? Obviously, 2020 has been one heck of a year, right? And may not really be, your current 2020 finances may not be accurately reflected in your 2019 tax returns. If that's the case, you still have to use 2019 tax returns to hand in these forms. Right? Don't switch the tax returns that you decide to use because you think something else is going to be more accurate. Hand in exactly what they're asking for. And then after you're done with submitting exactly what they're asking for, then you need to let us know in a letter, and it can be an email. It can be an email letter or an attachment to in an email that your circumstances and your family's circumstances are different. And this is how the financial circumstances of my family are different. I have a parent who's lost a job. I have a parent who was furloughed, who's making 20% less this year. I have a parent who needed to stay home because my siblings are now in online school and so had to give up a position, whatever it may be. We are in a position to take into account what those circumstances are and reevaluate the financial aid award that we would provide based on the information that you're letting us know about. So in those situations, we will often get back to you and say, hey, we need this, this, and this. And we'll add them to the checklist that you will see on the admissions line. We'll probably email you about it too. Thanks so much for your note outlining your circumstances. We're really sorry that you're really struggling with this, but this is what we need, right? And it should come from your counselor, and you should be able to have a person to correspond with, and there shouldn't be any guesswork. Like, we'll tell you exactly what we need. And that way, when we get to the point of admission, if you're admitted, we have all the documentation that we need. So us getting in touch with you, telling you we need additional documentation because of a COVID-related job loss is not an indication that you've been admitted, right? It's an indication that we're reviewing your application so that if you are admitted, we're in a position of giving you the best possible financial aid package, right? So oftentimes it's interpreted much more positively in terms of the admission decision than it actually might be. But the point is that we need to have all of that information way in advance so that we're not giving you a financial aid award that's not realistic, right? We want to give you something because if you've been admitted, we want you here, right? We want you to come. We want you to be part of this family. We want you to be able to take advantage of everything that Pomona has to offer, not to do it halfway, to do it the same way that everybody else gets to do it, to have the same opportunities to do study abroad, to have the same opportunities to live on campus and participate in all of the activities that you're interested in, to have the same opportunities to take every single class that any other student can take, right? So there shouldn't be any student at Pomona that has a different type of education, and the financial aid is provided in order to make sure that that is what the situation is for each Pomona student. So it doesn't help us if we can't give you a realistic, award notification. And so the more that we know up front, the more we can give you what you need to know earlier on. That being said, if you don't give it to us until after you've heard about your admission notice, it doesn't mean that we won't take it into consideration. It just means you've got to give us a little bit more time, right? And in order to make your admission decision or your decision to come to Pomona, you may just have a little bit of a shorter window. So if you find out, by the last week in March or the first week in April, right, and we're supposed to make a decision about whether you're coming, if you're a regular decision student, by May 1st, if we don't have all of your information until April 15th, you may have a week to really take a look at that and make sure that that works for you, or to have a conversation with the financial aid person. So it's to everyone's advantage if you give it to us earlier. We can have a bit more of a back and forth and a firmer more robust understanding of what your financial circumstances are, rather than trying to just get you something super quickly so that you can make a decision. The more we can talk about it, I think the better and more realistically we can work with the family to make sure that what we're providing is going to make it possible for you to be here. So, which is what we all want.
Yeah, and I will say, we appreciate how much work this is. You're often applying to many schools, and so the goal is, of course, for you to get back many offers of admission and many financial aid offers, so you can compare the different offers and make sure you're making a good choice for your family and also for your future. So there definitely is a benefit to completing that financial aid application on time. Allison, 2 quick questions. I think they'll be quick. One is, how accurate are the financial aid calculators out there? And the other is, can you talk a little bit about Pomona's home equity policy?
So how accurate? I'm just writing this down because I have like the worst memory. So how accurate, it depends on how well you fill out the form, right? So, oftentimes the impulse on a calculator is to skip questions or to move through it fast because it's only an estimate. If you do that and you miss things and you don't read the instructions thoroughly and you go through it as quickly as possible, it oftentimes is not going to be accurate, right? Because it may tell you that, it's accurate in any way. It could underestimate the age you're receiving. It could actually overestimate, because the calculator actually is fairly precise. The actual calculator. The estimator that's on there is 5 questions and it gives you a range. And so that's a good place to start, right? If you start with the estimator and answer 5 questions and get a range, and then take some time, go into the calculator, type in all the specifics. If you really want something that's more specific than a range of financial aid that you would be eligible for. But you should be getting a financial aid, calculated financial aid award from the calculator that's within the range that the estimator gave you. So if the 2 are not matching, something's missing, right? Something's actually wrong. But the estimate will be good if the information that you put into the calculator is accurate, which means you have to read what they say. Put line 7 of your 1040 on this line, right? So you have to have your tax returns in front of you, and you need to be using the right line and putting it in the right space, right? So I do think they're helpful, but you do have to kind of take them seriously and take time to do them right. Home equity. We use, so in our formula, in the CSS profile, we ask that families tell us the year that they bought their home and the amount of equity they have in their home, meaning how much their home is worth minus how much debt is still on the home is the equity. So, and then we count a percentage of that equity, and we don't take the entire equity as an asset. So we'll take a small percentage of that equity and count that as an asset. And when we count that as an asset, then we take a small percentage of your total assets as a contribution toward your education. So the role that home equity actually plays in terms of the percentage of the contribution is really, really small. Even if your home equity is, even if you paid off your home and you have a lot of home equity, which is great, then it doesn't actually play into the formula significantly in terms of how it impacts the contribution number.
Yes.
Because we cap it at such a small percentage.
Yeah, and this is a really, really good policy for families, for those of you who have home equity. So the phrase sometimes admissions officers might use is called income protection. Will protect a certain amount of this. And so it is definitely something to ask different financial aid offices, because some offices will do what we do at Pomona. We take a small percentage of a percentage. Others will see home equity very differently. And so you may actually have, if you have a home with significant amounts of equity or that's appreciated in value over the course of the last, let's say, 10 years, you may find financial aid packages really vary from school to school because of that increased equity. So it's a really good question. I'm glad you answered it. I'm going to take this next one and give Allison a little break because we do have a few more financial aid questions here. Ella says that I studied in a public high school in France for 1 year. How will admissions offices evaluate a foreign transcript? So we're totally comfortable with that. We know the French system grades up through 20. We also know, particularly in France, that you don't often see anything like 18, 19, or 20. That's a very rare grade. So we know different kinds of systems. When I talked earlier about admissions offices have assignments by region, that is so that we can develop an expertise in a region. So for those in the office who read France, they know the French system. If there's ever a question from an admissions officer about another system that they're unfamiliar with, they just go to that regional admissions officer and get a little more clarity. So 9th grade in France and then 10th, 11th, and 12th in the United States, we'll be able to read those grades without any problems and be able to evaluate that transcript pretty easily would be my initial response. And this is very common. Sometimes students hop around. You might be in 9th grade in one school and 10th grade in another school, or maybe your mom or dad or parent had a job transfer, and so you moved in the middle of high school. All of that's okay. We'll be able to evaluate you fairly and equitably and be able to understand what those grades are and what that curriculum is. If we have any questions, we will reach out to the school. So we always want to make a decision with good information, and that becomes critical as our relationship with high school counselors. So next question, Allison, is about financial aid travel. And I might sort of lop that in with what about books and travel and personal expenses? How do we think about those kinds of things?
So the financial aid package is based on a budget or a cost of attendance. So we estimate what we think it's going to cost you to be at Pomona for 9 months. So that's room and your board, so your food, your tuition, any fees that you would pay or be assessed. Then we also, you will have some personal expenses, right? Everybody has to buy toothpaste, right? So we have an allocated amount for personal expenses and for books, and then also for travel. So if you're, and that amount for travel will be different for each student depending on where you're coming from. So if you're coming from LA, your travel amount will be different than if you're coming from New York, right? So, and all of those expenses are added together into our cost of attendance. Then we take that cost of attendance, right? And from that cost of attendance, we're using our profile form and our FAFSA form to estimate how much we are estimating that your family can contribute, and then and subtracting that out of the total cost. And then what's left over is what Pomona will provide. That's what we mean when we say we're providing 100% of your demonstrated need. So it's the total cost of everything we think it's going to cost you, not just your tuition and your fees, but everything it's going to cost you to be at Pomona and live at Pomona and flourish at Pomona for 9 months, minus the cost that your family will take on or is taking on. And then we're going to provide the funding for the rest of that. So in that 100% of demonstrated need, we're also providing funds for travel and for books. The reality is that we don't give you that money before you get to Pomona, right? So if you need the money for a plane ticket, right, some of that may need to come out of any of the parent calculated contribution amount so that you can get to Pomona or buy your books when you first get there, right? As opposed to, and then your Pomona grant will go and get applied to the other costs that are being charged to your bill. So it gets kind of complicated. I don't want the response to be too complicated. The response is, yes, we help you with your travel costs, but no, we don't give you a travel voucher or a book voucher in many situations, right? In order to buy a ticket to get to Pomona. You might have to reimburse yourself, so to speak, and make arrangements to pay for the ticket up front if you're coming from a long way away.
Yeah.
Was that okay?
That answers it. And then I have a question here about how we evaluate transcripts. And so I'm putting in the chat, what happens is you as a student will not input your own transcript. So we are going to be asking for that from the school. The transcript will come with what's called a secondary school report, or an SSR, and that SSR will be matched with the transcript, and then that is the academic sort of cornerstone of the evaluation. So we're looking for grades 9, 10, 11, and 12 with some context from the counselor. Oftentimes that includes a letter or some comments that we get from a counselor, and that's in addition to 2 teacher recommendations. So when I talked about the fact that you're submitting the Common App is only about half of your application. The other half comes from teachers and counselors and all those people around you who you're asking to support you, which is why I made a plea for them to say, if you are in need of their support, make sure you're communicating with them before break. Make sure that you're getting them what they need before you leave on winter break, because they're going to need that material to submit via Common App on your behalf. So I guess the final question here, which is a good one about sort of middle class students, Allison, I might broaden it to just say, there is not like a certain dollar amount that financial aid gives out, right? So if my family makes $60,000, I can always expect to receive X amount of aid, right? It's much more nuanced than that. Can you sort of explain a little bit more about maybe what goes into some of the financial aid packaging in a more nuanced way, as you sort of have different kinds of income or different kinds of family scenarios? Like if your older sibling is at school, what does that do? What if your grandparents live with you? How does that affect you? Things like that.
Okay, so when you're putting information into the FAFSA for the federal funding, and you're putting the information into the profile form for institutional funding, the kinds of information that you're putting in are include the number of people in your family, and that would include anybody who's living in your household. So if grandparents are living in your household or they're being supported, they can be listed. And the number of siblings can be step siblings, half siblings, 3/4 siblings, whatever you got, whoever's in the house, right? It can actually be if your parents are supporting nieces or nephews who are actually living in the house, you can list those too, right? So you list the number of people who are in your household who are being supported by the income that you're listing, right? And you are listing the number of people in your household who are also in college like you will be, right? Those are the 2 factors that play most heavily into how we evaluate the income. Because let's say your family earns $100,000, right? And you live in LA and you have 5 family members in the house, right? We're going to evaluate and you have 1 student in college, right? We're going to take all of that information and sift it through our formula to come up with a contribution number. That contribution number is going to be significantly different from a student who lives in rural Montana, is an only child, is the only one in college, and has 2 wage earners in the family. Right? So 5 members living in LA on $100,000 with 2 in college is going to be significantly different, right? And probably receive significantly more in aid from Pomona than a student who has 2 parents and 1 kid at home in a rural area making $100,000. Where the living cost is significantly lower. They're not paying for another sibling or another person in college. They're not paying to feed 3 other people, right? And so more of their income will be expected to be available to help cover some of the cost of college than it would for that family in LA. So all of those factors play into how we evaluate each family. So you can almost never kind of go, I have a friend who has exactly the same income and she got more aid. It never works that way because the families are never the same, right? I've never met two families that are the same. There are half the students who are at the institution are on aid, and every single package is slightly different, right? Only because everybody's family size is different, the family obligations are different. So we may be counting, like Adam was saying, we may be counting 2 grandparents that you're supporting for one family, and 2 in college, whereas with another family we only have 1 student in college but living in a lower cost area. So it's variable, and that's why the forms ask for so much information, but it's important because we can't just sort of look on a chart, point at where you belong on that chart and give you a figure, because your situation deserves a bit more attention than that, we think, because the costs are significant, right? At Pomona, it makes a significant difference, the amount of aid that we're able to provide. And we, like I said before, we want to make sure that if we're offering you a place of admission, that you can afford to be here, right? And our job is to make a fair evaluation so that if there are 2 families that are living next door to each other that have 5 family members who are both in LA, that we're not making significant differences in how we evaluate those 2 very similar families. But if family circumstances are significantly different, we really need to be able to take that into consideration. And I know that doesn't, so what that means is there's no maximum income, right? There are families that one would think might not qualify for aid, but given their circumstances, the number of kids they have in college, the cost at Pomona, that they really could qualify for financial aid, even having a fairly significant income. So my rule of thumb is always, if you think it costs you maybe a couple of hours to see if you get a few $1,000s, I think that's a pretty good rate of return. Like if someone was going to give me a few $1,000s for a couple of hours filling out a form, I'd fill out the form. But and then it also gives you a basis for a discussion. We can't discuss your financial aid or what you would get unless we've got the information to work with. And then we've got a place to start. And then it turns into a conversation about, yeah, I told you I had this income, but there's other people that you don't understand that I'm still supporting that we need to now. So,
yes.
Long answer to a short question. Sorry.
Yeah, no, and that was the point. I think we got a couple of questions as you were talking. And, as Allison said, there isn't a formula here. We ask for a lot of things in the application to Pomona because we look at lots of things before we admit you. Financial aid has a similar kind of process. They ask for a lot of things because they want as complete a picture as possible when they're putting together that financial aid package. And so I think the message is very clear. You're an individual, and we embrace that. And that's really, really key, both in admissions and financial aid. So we're going to go ahead and wrap. And one of the things that I always like to end on is, both Allison and I have a lot of experience in lots of different places. And, we've been through this before. And so I just thought we would end on one little piece of wisdom from the admissions side and one little piece of wisdom from the financial aid side. And I'll go first because I was thinking about this before we got to this point. I've been thinking about this the last few days, and I think my piece of advice to all of you out there is be kind to those around you. There's a lot of people going through a lot of stuff, and you don't always know what everybody's dealing with when you're asking teachers to write recommendations or counselors to help you and support you. And I think one of the things that you can always do is provide time and kindness when you interact and engage with people who are supporting you through the process. There's a whole lot of people cheerleading you through this application process. There's a lot of people that want you to succeed. And how you treat them as you move through the process and the kind of ways in which you express you being grateful for their support, that means so much to them, and also I think to you when you get to the end of this process. We all want you to succeed, and I think being kind to people along the way will really make for a much better process in the end in April when you get all of the information back and you can make a good decision about where you want to enroll. Allison, I'll leave you with the last word.
Well, my last little piece of advice is never assume, right? So never assume that you won't qualify for aid, or that you wouldn't get in, or that you are, because all of those things have so many variables and so many people participating in them, that I think that it's important to give yourself a chance, to put yourself out there, to take some chances, to be in a place that's going to challenge you, stretch a little bit, and don't be scared to ask for the help that you need to do those things. And if that's help from the financial aid office, we are here to help you. That's what we're paid to do. We want you to be here, but I don't shortchange yourself, for lack of a better way of putting it. I'll never apply. I'll never qualify for financial aid. Well, there are a lot more people out there who actually qualify than thought they would have. And same thing with the admission application. There's no way for you to know what those 10 admission officers are looking for, or what other applications they have in their hands, or who you're competing against for that spot, right? You could be exactly what they're looking for and you have no idea, right? So we tend to be harder on ourselves than others are, especially when you're achieving at the level. If you're considering applying to Pomona, you're obviously a high achieving student, and we tend to be pretty tough on ourselves. So I would say give yourself a little bit of a break, give yourself, a little bit of credit for the work that you've done so far. Use the people that you have with some grace, as Adam suggests, and give us a chance. Give us a chance to let us show you what we can give you, especially when it comes to the aid process. So.
Yes, so well said. What a great point to end on. I want to thank all of you for tuning in today. Great questions, great conversation. We actually cleared the board with your questions. I'm very happy about that. We know you're about to go into a great winter break, perhaps, or you're about to end some academic time. Some of you, others of you are about to press submit on your application. We're here for you. Reach out. Let us know what we can do. Thank you so much. Thank you, Allison. Thank you, Katrina, for hanging in there. Have a fantastic evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you happen to be in the world. Bye-bye.